Hey Luis, looking at your stuff this week. See that you got the new audio in here, so I'm just going to take a quick listen again.
Dad? Dad loved superheroes. He believed in them. Loved superheroes. He believed in them.
All right, cool.
These are not heroes. If they were, your father would still be here.
Dad?
All right, cool.
Dad?
So I'll start breaking this down bit by bit, section by section, and we will talk about it.
Dad? Dad loved superheroes.
Okay, so we're going to look at this first. Dad stuff. All right, so we're going to look at this first phrase here. Dad. Cool. So when I play through it, what that head shake is reading like really quick, and on the pullback, it's reading like the neck and head and chest are all kind of like tied together. I'm not sure what happened to your screen right arm. It seems to be, yeah, I don't know. So let's talk about this specifically and in more detail. So here we're leaning forward, which is great. Looks like the character starts the conversation like really engaged, and that's great, right? And then we're saying, Dad. So this head shake, first we're going back with the neck quite a bit, and then the neck stays back. Well, it looks like the crown of the head and the torso goes forward. So I find that to be kind of disjointed, what the neck is doing and like what the torso is doing. And generally, I think there should be some kind of like relationship or parity between the two. So if we're leaning forward, this is like a side view, right? With our character's chest here. And maybe it's something like this. I'm going to use some quicker triangle heads here, right? And we want to go forward with this, and that's fine. But maybe we want to, let me turn on ghosting, so I know that I'm actually drawing it relatively in the correct place. So if we're going to go forward with the chest like this, you know what I mean? What do we want to do with the head? Well, eventually, when you get into the head shake, I think we would want that head shake to be forward too, right? And maybe what you're doing is when we're anticipating the head shake, so like this is when the neck goes back, maybe what you're thinking, and I'm not sure, is that we want to start dropping the head while like trying to like drag the neck and keep the head in the same spot. So like here, maybe now if I turn off ghosting, turn on a little bit of this trace paper, like you can see the head drags back, but then it needs to come forward again to catch back up with the chest to be kind of comfortable. Maybe that's what the intention is here, with the head going back, but then it never really feels like it comes forward. You know what I mean? I feel like this angle here on the neck is very similar to this angle here on the neck. And we're not like returning to the starting forward thing. Now maybe that's just an illusion or something, but I think where I would see that forward movement of the neck would be through this gesture here, right? And so I would see like the chin and everything kind of pushing forward a little bit as the neck brings the head forward, right? It's also a little tough in the spacing throughout here because, you know, the head's going back, but the chin isn't dropping at all. In fact, it looks like the chin is lifting. So what I would suggest is maybe to start the move, like if this is where your chin is, we're starting that move down. You know, if the chin's here, then that actually gives us the opportunity to start in between that to get, you know, into here and eventually get way down here. But by going up, it gives us a further distance to travel down. You know what I mean? To get down into here. And then as the torso in this section rotates back, that would be a good opportunity. Hopefully things don't get too messy in my drawings. To like try to drag the chin. So if the chin is here, when you start to go back, you know, maybe we can use that neck to keep that chin like dragging and still kind of forward. So the neck rotation would increase this way as the chest rotation increases this way. And you're going to get like a looser, more organic feeling happening throughout this move, right? And then you really want to like, once you get that going, you really want to track like your nose arcs as you're getting into this, because here we hit like the extreme left, and this is all great, and then we go over to the right, we go over to the right, but then it seems to kind of like hit a wall on the right, you know what I mean? And the timing of that, this, maybe you can keep it going a little bit and soften the out a little bit more, like ease out of that move, and then by the time she comes back up here, that's maybe, I think that would work better, because then you would get kind of like a little overshoot and then a corrective back up to like what your neutral pose is going to be, you know, up here. And that arrow isn't representative, sadly. Not my best arrow work. So let me try to get something a little bit better that may describe like what I would see a successful arc of that nose kind of looking like maybe something like this. So as you're like moving here to shake it to the right, you know, the spacing is going to slow down and get tighter, and then as she pulls the head up, it's going to open up and then get tighter when it comes into the rest. So something like that I think would really help this like intro part here, because I'm also seeing like the head, neck, and chest all arrive like at the same time on this frame. I don't feel like there's any drag on the neck or drag on the crown of the head, or maybe, you know, you want to lead with the crown of the head. That's up to you. Whatever you think supports the gesture best. But it's always going to look kind of like stiff and less human-like when things all kind of arrive at the same point. There might be a little drift happening in the neck at this stage. I can see that, like the neck's rotating back a little bit as the chest rotates forward. And that's the right idea. But I think as we're coming up here, you know, you should like really try to loosen up that neck by getting all of this to kind of be forward, and maybe even, you know, like I said, like maybe you want to even consider dragging the crown of the head like forward this way throughout this part, so that it doesn't come up at the exact same time as the chest and everything else. I could get into this section and kind of like talk about the arms, but maybe I'll save that for when we get like the chest, neck, head, all that core stuff working smoothly, and then we can talk about more specifics on the arm. So I'm going to move on to the next section for now, the next kind of phrase. So let me get the volume on.
Dad loved superheroes.
Okay, that's great. Dad loves superheroes. I remember this is the
Dad
part
loved...
I really liked last time, although something happened to your right arm where it doesn't feel like it's gesturing along with the left arm, and maybe that was an attempt to eliminate twinning, but I think maybe it's gone a little bit too far, because now like that arm doesn't seem, I don't know, it seems odd that the screen left arm is doing so much and that the screen right arm is doing so little. So in order to combat twinning, if that's indeed what was going on here, you know, I think you don't need a ton to combat twinning. You just don't want it to look like this, right? You just don't want it to look exactly the same, but the gesture should feel the same, right? So instead of like doing it like this, how could you do it? You know, you can like, maybe you could like turn it out. You know, maybe the hand could be doing like a different angle or something. So twinning doesn't mean like, avoiding twinning doesn't mean like you can't do the exact same thing, right? What it means is like when it looks mirrored across like this axis of your body, you just kind of want to find ways of like mixing it up. Like another solution maybe could be just like keeping it lower, right? Then, but it should be like, it should feel like the two gestures that's happening should feel like connected, right? So all the purple solutions would probably help eliminate twinning or whatever, but what I feel like now is that hand's kind of like staying below frame. It doesn't feel like the wrist, like there's any change in angle in the wrist at all. So it feels like, you know, even if you bring this upper arm forward and then, you know, maybe it's something like this. So anyways, I feel like what was there maybe last week was like maybe a little more successful than whatever's going on with the right arm. But looking at like the head and body action, I feel like the timing and spacing and everything on the chest are like amazing and great. I really like that. I would recommend that you take a pass here on the head and neck. Try to loosen that up. It feels like the neck maybe doesn't have much or enough like rotation forward, and everything feels like it's kind of starting around the same place coming up and ending at the same place coming up. So maybe, you know, you're dragging the head forward as the neck forward, you know, as the torso starts to come up. So you get like some looseness and some organic change, because this being kind of locked into this makes the character feel like a little stiff and unnatural. So I would take a pass on that for sure, trying to loosen it up. And there's no right answer if like, oh, if you want the head to lead this gesture and the chest to follow next, like you can act it out yourself and see what that looks like. You can even video yourself trying to do that and see what that looks like, or you can do it with the chest first and drag the head up next. I think my instinct tells me that it would be best to drag the neck forward and have it catch up to the torso. Once the torso gets here into its forwardmost place, then that's when, you know, the neck should still be rotating up into this kind of like final position. You know what I mean? And the head is gonna want a similar kind of consideration, that you don't just want to like have everything hit on the same frame, but things need to be offset like that to keep it feeling loose and natural. Cool. This feels like a little drift in the torso, where it's just kind of like slowly moving back. And so we want to try to get just some different spacing on that, because if the spacing of the chest rotation is kind of like this, it's just going to feel very even, floaty, and whatever. So the kind of spacing maybe you can look for is, because we're like coming out of a motion, maybe, you know, it's bigger at the top, and then you start getting into like finer and finer motion until like you're at the same place, but it's like at a stop, you know, like you've taken the same number of frames, or maybe you've even used fewer frames to come to a stop, but like it feels like a very linear in between right there in that bit, and that's pretty minor, but it's going to influence all the rest of everything else going on. Again, the screen right arm, I'm not really sure like what's going on there. I see some chatter happening in the bag around here. I'm not really sure if that's going to add to your performance, having that bag kind of like chatter around like that. It might actually wind up being fairly distracting for where you want the audience to look, which is like right here. So I would maybe, whatever this is, like chill it way out or nix it. You know what I mean? Maybe it's reacting to the elbow kind of like bumping up against the bag and stuff, but this like really quick and sudden motion here just is drawing, I don't know, at least for me, it draws my eye like away from where we want it and down to here. It's probably going to do that the same to your audience, you know what I mean? So we want to make sure that we're not undermining our character's primary performance, you know what I mean? All right, moving on to the next section. I think this is probably, oh no, she's got another line.
He believed in them.
Right on, that's looking good. He believed in them. I like that it feels a bit smaller now. It has some contrast from like the bigger phrases that come before.
He believed in them.
That's great. I think for this, the torso looks really good.
He believed in them. He believed in them. He believed in them.
The timing on the hand looks really good and everything. I would maybe plus this pose by like swinging the hand out a little bit instead of leaving it in, because it feels a little bit like this angle and this angle on the wrist. That feels a little bit broken or incongruous. So I would rotate it where, I'm not sure how successful my drawing is going to be, you know, of this, because it's a difficult angle, but just maybe getting that wrist turned out a little bit, maybe like the trick to making that feel a little bit more natural. Another thing is we're getting a lot of drift on the neck towards the end of this, like it's like really smooth and everything. And I think maybe to like with the body going up like this and then going down and then coming back, this is another great opportunity to keep that neck rotating forward throughout the whole thing, you know, like by here the neck could be forward, the head would be forward with it, and then it's going to feel like a bit more earnest, right? A little bit more like, yeah, I don't know. That would be my suggestion, is to offset the neck a little bit more and the head a little bit more, and that also might help you with this like drift problem that you're having at the end. I don't know that you need to like drift back up into this pose at all. Like you could just kind of say you believed in them, have a little bit of like a settle, but then just like hold whatever your frame is here. And you don't really need to return to a more upright pose. But yeah, I'm seeing a lot of like drift on the chest rotation and the neck rotation and the head rotation here. Like it all just feels a little bit like the computer has been left to do the in-betweens, and we just get this quality of motion here that is just not a very real looking spacing or timing on that stuff, you know. All right, let's move on to the next bit of the mom.
These are not heroes. If they were, your father would still be here. These are not heroes.
So what I'm seeing on this phrasing is there's like 3 major phrases. These are not heroes. So it's on heroes, father, and be here. And I feel like all 3 of these are kind of having equal weight and equal size. And I think you need a little bit more variation to make some bigger and some smaller. So you have to figure out like where is the big emphasis that you want in this sentence, and it's not necessarily just based on the audio read. It's about you putting yourself in this character's head and trying to say what's the subtext of this, and which one does this character care about most? Which one would this character want to emphasize the most with the child in order to make their point?
Heroes. If they were, your father would still be here. These are not heroes. If they were, your father would still be here.
I would suggest that maybe father is the smallest of these 3, because it's good to get an emphasis on father, but she's not really trying to say anything specific about the father. She's talking more about heroes and the fact that the father's missing, right? The just bringing up the father's name shouldn't be like a super huge, shouldn't be on equal weight. Talking about these heroes who she obviously hates, who she probably even hates having to call them heroes. And then the be here meaning like everything would be right with the world if my husband and the father of my child were still with us, and it's the hero's fault that they're not with us, right? So like you have to really try to get into the subtext and really help communicate that to your audience as an actor.
Heroes. If they were, your father would still be here. These are not heroes. If they were, your father would still be here.
And so maybe heroes and be here can both be kind of large because they have some distance from each other, but like if you don't introduce the variety of having father be a little bit smaller, it's going to be none of them are going to stand out as the most important thing, because everything you're telling the audience, these three things are equally important, and it kind of loses some of its potency or efficacy as a story point.
Not
so
heroes. If
the heroes is a really big slap on the comic book.
these are not heroes.
And I'm not really hearing that being supported in the read of the dialogue.
These are not heroes.
It's a nice read.
These are not heroes.
But I don't know that it should be as big of a slap. So getting back to this idea, maybe this is the second biggest. I'll just write second big, hope you know what I mean. And then this can be the biggest. So you're trying to kind of like watch through your spacing and stuff on this and figure out like, well, how can I make this true, right? How do I make father smaller? How do I make heroes medium and be here be biggest, right? So maybe this gesture where she slaps the comic book can be a little smaller because this is a big wind up and slap. But even if you have a big wind up and slap, it's still going to feel smaller without this large, equally large recoil, right? So maybe after she slaps the comic book, her hand stays like down more, you know, and so that you don't, when you pull it back up, it kind of gives the gesture a bigness. Maybe that's one way of like kind of de-emphasizing it a little bit. It's a possibility. Father is like a big wind up here with the hands and a big lurch forward with the upper body. Here you have the neck and arms going down, but the torso looks totally frozen in space. So I feel like you're not considering the spacing on this impending move yet in this frame, and I think it would be helpful to, like, as you're building these poses, to put them all on the same frame, get them all stepped, start building in your spacing at this point, because then you're thinking about it and considering it. But when you go from this to this, as soon as you hit the spline button, everything's gonna be even, and you're gonna have to do that work anyways. So it's better and cheaper to do it earlier, because then it's like, if you're really thinking through all these poses, then, you know, I don't know. And also maybe when you go forward, yeah, I won't get too much into it more than that, but it feels like this section is like less kind of thought through and resolved than maybe the earlier one, but that's okay. Like the spacing on this head shake, like that's a really big turn. That's probably the biggest spacing turn on this head shake. Going from like here to here feels like one of the largest ones. This feels like a smaller turn based on where she started from. Maybe that's not true though. Maybe it's just an appearance. Doesn't look to be true. And then that one feels smaller. So I think with a head shake, I would suggest that you go small in that direction, and then bigger when she returns to the other direction, and then less big. So it goes small, big, ran out of real estate, small, big, less big, back to center. So that kind of like tempo, right? That kind of spacing on your head shake, I think will feel like you kind of work into it. You don't just start with like the biggest one. It's almost like that first little shake that you have going this way is almost like an anticipation in a way into the big one this way. And then the other one is kind of almost like an overshoot getting back to normal. I feel like your overshoot getting back to normal feels great. It's weird to talk about it like it's an overshoot because technically, it isn't. It's an intentional gesture, but that's just my suggesting to make the spacing on that feel a little more rooted in reality, Yeah, but I'll leave this one there. I'll leave this critique here. That's probably plenty to chew on. But it's great. I love hearing the new voice, and I like seeing your progress in that first bit. I'm really not sure what's going on with the screen right arm, so I hope that that's kind of a mistake or something you're working on, like recreating or whatever, to get kind of like back where you were. And I know we don't want twinning, but we also need unified thought and gesture between left hand and right hand. So it's really just, it's not about like eliminating movement. It's more just about designing the pose not to be exactly the same across the central axis of the character. But anyways, great stuff, and I look forward to seeing your submission next week. Keep it up, Luis.